School number 1. The chair of my doctoral committee at Penn State, a trusted mentor who was also the director of the art school, accuses me of breaking into the department offices at night to meddle with another student's file. The student had a Muslim-sounding name, and so I was a natural suspect. He and another professor, a big-boned Canadian woman, bring me into their offices and indeed bring me to tears with their ambush of false accusations. Turns out the secretary had misfiled a document of mine in another student's file. They could have simply asked her, but they let their imagination run wild and jumped straight to the trial. I told the dean about it, but he recommended to just let it go and finish my studies. This man, my doctoral committee chair, an Armenian with a bizarre and macabre case of what I can only describe as genocide envy, my new term and a very rare clinical condition, and I'm not joking, later goes on to censor another Jewish student's on-campus exhibition of pro-Israel anti-terrorist paintings. Joining him is another professor, a very famous painter at Penn State, with an endowed professorship, who goes around the art school hallways tearing down posters announcing the student exhibition. At a subsequent confrontation, he apparently yells, and this is, as verbatim as I got from a witness there, "Israel is a country that has no right to exist," despite having a Jewish girlfriend. This incident makes the national press, and the director is reprimanded. He accepts mandatory enrollment in an anger management course as a condition of keeping his job. School number 2. At the State University of New York, Old Westbury, where I was a permanent adjunct until 2013, the Student Association holds an anti-Israel conference featuring a keynote speaker who is the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. Exploiting a Jewish speaker and a child of survivors to legitimize the biased conference is exceptionally vile to me. I ignore it and focus on my teaching. And you have to understand that I also choose to ignore these things as a matter of these incidents, as a matter of pure self-preservation. These kinds of things make my blood boil, as I'm sure they do yours. And I often feel just short of an aneurysm or some kind of a cardiac event. So I try to avoid getting worked up at every incident. At this school, at the end of a end-of-year faculty appreciation dinner, I'm sitting with my colleagues and the conversation turns to summer travel. I mention I'm going to Israel, and the chair of the department, a French woman, looks at me with disapproval. I tell the table, "Oh yes, I'm a big Zionist," just to be a little testy. To which the French woman, my supervisor, recoils with visible disgust and an indiscernible utterance to match, and bites her tongue. Had she not bitten her tongue, it looked like she was about to say something very unnice. At the very same dinner, another senior professor, a colleague, introduces me to someone else from another department, English, I believe it was. This woman looks at me squarely and says, "Well, I didn't realize we're still letting Israelis on campus." I'm, of course, stunned, but I cannot issue a comeback, right, or make a scene because I'm an adjunct. And, I'm trying to be on my best behavior and maybe get a tenure track position. Flash forward to my 8th year of teaching there, not 1, but 2 tenure track positions become available. But I only find out about them online in an ad. So no one cares to tell me. After 8 years of faithful teaching, and let me assure you, it's not because I was a bad teacher. I always got the highest evaluations in the department. School number 3. At a faculty meeting at Pratt, I'm really running out of schools to teach here in the New York area. The chair of the art education department jokes to everyone present when he joyfully exclaims, "Where else can you have an Israeli and an Iranian getting along like this?" at a faculty meeting. Of course, this was meant to demonstrate the fact that I am Israeli and he is Iranian, and that as chair, he is a benevolent and tolerant figure, like the king of Persia himself. This, again, is my boss who can either assign me or not assign me to teaching for the next semester. So one does wonder, do you hide the fact that you're from Israel to get ahead, or to simply keep your measly little adjunct position? I was subsequently laid off for reasons that are still unclear. School number 4. I teach art history online for a small college in West Virginia, of all places, but not deep West Virginia. This is just about an hour outside of Washington, D.C. In the cover and safety of the online environment, a few students have taken the opportunity to do some of the usual Israel bashing. Now, these students were literally born yesterday, right? And they know nothing about the Middle East, or at least next to nothing. And you can tell that they're regurgitating things that they've heard from other sources. And it's completely off topic, right? I ask, how has the Renaissance impacted, the fledgling Baroque aesthetic in art history? And so they start, well, Israel, is obviously implicated in this. And it's not just the art world. I mean, it's not just academia, it's also the art world. Incident number 1, and bear with me, this is important to tell you this. With much excitement, I visit the new museum. It's called the New Museum on the Bowery, shortly after it opens. On the 3rd floor, there's an installation by a young artist envisioning the year 2048, when Israel no longer exists. This is the installation. I'm told by the didactic panel on the wall that he is not anti-Israel, he's just, dealing with the political realities of the day. This makes me very mad, and I decide to sneak a little note into the museum installation to express my displeasure. As Peter will tell you, I can get a little over the top sometimes. I hope the artist got it. After calming down, I go down to the lobby gift store to do some browsing, where, on cue, I find a stack of prominently displayed DVDs about the terrible Israeli aggression in Gaza in the new museum gift shop. I don't know if you frequent these places, but this is what you find when you walk into the museum gift shop. And mind you, this is 20 feet away from a plaque of all the donors and patrons that are, let's face it, 95% Jewish names. The irony is obviously lost on the museum and on the gift store buyer, who, is indirectly, his job is indirectly made possible by the generosity of these community members. Art World incident number 2. In the mid-90s, I sit on a College Art Association annual conference panel with one of the most prominent living American artists, a very nice Jewish lady. I won't name names. Okay, I'll name names. It's Martha Rossler. Flash forward to 2011, and we're now Facebook friends. Her wall on Facebook, however, is constantly updated with anti-Israel rants and liked by her very large circle of art world groupies and worshipers. I decide to take her on Facebook, and it soon devolves into a very ugly, very public Facebook showdown. Me against this superstar with unusually vicious disciples. This kind of thing really affects your career in the art world, right? Where everyone is a self-righteous, politically correct, postmodern, lefty, activist, robot. I later have to walk by her artwork as it is displayed at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where I am a lowly tour guide. The humiliation, which leads me to incident number 3, the Met. The education department is using a map at the Metropolitan Museum of Art of the Middle East for teaching purposes, to teach the kids about the Middle East. And this is not just ancient Egypt. This is today. There's other modern countries labeled, except for Israel, of course. Nowhere to be found. When I'm in the office alone, I take a big fat Sharpie and I write Israel on the map. This brings me great pleasure. This on top of one of the worst incidents in memory at the Metropolitan Museum. The curator of the Alexander McQueen show, the Met's most successful show ever, of the fashion designer, decides to use the soundtrack from Schindler's List for one of the fashion videos in the exhibition. The John Williams composition that I'm sure you all know, which makes us all weep, and the soundtrack to that film is being trivialized. Really? It's really unbelievable to me. It's not just academia and the art world. I could go on and on. The internet, which I'm sure you've all experienced at the bottom of the articles and at the end of the YouTube videos, where you take the temperature of the culture. Radio every morning now, NPR and WNYC wakes me up with BBC, and Al Jazeera I've heard recently on NPR. Known anti-Israel organizations. Do we not have journalists in this country? The New York Times, that used to be the paper of record, is now on board with all the usual suspects. I hardly ever read it anymore. The Park Slope Food Co-op wants to boycott my Israeli hummus. My students are all wearing Arafat-style keffiyeh scarves, you know, the ones you see on the street. My bank is laundering millions of dollars to terrorists, and, you know, the ATM machine greets me in Arabic. You know, where the hell am I? What is going on? I wanted to detail some of these incidents and experiences so that you can understand my cumulative level of frustration and alienation. And I want to preempt this, you know, calling it Islamophobia, because that's really not what it is. I'm having to mourn the loss of what I thought would have been a brilliant career in academia and the art world. Okay, I may not be the greatest artist, but I'm really a good teacher. But clearly I'm not as welcome as I thought. I'm a second-generation Israeli. Both my parents were born in Israel and served in the army. My mother's parents were Sephardic. Her father and his family were banished from Arab lands in the early 20th century, and her mother and family were living in Jerusalem for many generations, originally banished from Spain. My father's side is Ashkenazi. His parents left Poland early in 1922 as young idealistic Zionists and came to this very small strip of land, which was, you know, was then still known by its Roman name, Palestine. This paternal grandmother was one of 8 children who stayed behind. She was one of 8 children, the only one to make it to what was then Palestine. Everybody else stayed behind, and everybody else, of course, was murdered at Treblinka. Her father was a prominent Bialystok rabbi who was burnt alive inside a synagogue with hundreds of other Jews. This grandmother spent many years drying swamps in this forgotten wasteland. She lost her firstborn twin girls to malaria. 20 years later, in 1948, she lost her eldest son when he was killed by a terrorist just days after the War of Independence was supposedly over. Unfortunately, my father, who was a 14-year-old boy, witnessed this entire thing, which is really very unfortunate. It's a very formative trauma in his life, and it kind of kept him running for the rest of his life. And then enter me, born, you know, in the mid-60s, a product of all this tragedy, living out all the subsequent displacement and fragmented identity that comes with such a story, ironically back in the diaspora. As a musical theater performer in my younger days, I used to dance and sing. I would find myself on stage in the Anatevka number in Fiddler. And I understood it, always having to leave. And at sunrise, sunset, I would always cry on stage, which was very distracting. Apparently, my life was very much shaped by this terrorist who killed my uncle and traumatized my father. Flash forward 47 years, and here I am telling you about all this crap. And, you know, there's just so much that you can take. So I finally decided that enough was enough and it's time to do something. But I wanted to do it cleverly. I didn't want to just lash out, even though that's all I want to do all day. I decided to, within my own realm, within my own powers, I decided to write a little addendum, a 1-page, a 2-page addendum to my doctoral thesis at Penn State University, which, is in the humanities, right? Has nothing to do with the Middle East. But I symbolically wanted to disavow, to disown one particular scholar in my doctoral dissertation, Judith Butler. Judith Butler, as you know, is one of the great heroes, and maybe you don't know, in academia today. She's worshipped like a god by postmodernists. She is brilliant. Unfortunately, she is on the wrong side of a certain issue. And so I decided to kind of focus on her, and I have nothing against her personally. I wish her well. I just want to, change her ways. I decided to start my own movement, not BDS, but RDS is what I called it, and it stands for Retractions and Disavowals in Scholarship. Now, I won't read the whole addendum because you have it in your packet. And some of the packets, if you don't have one on your seat, they're in front of you in the seats, in the vacant seats. I would love for you to have a look at it. But let me read, please. Let me read just one paragraph that I think is crucial. The country that Butler vilifies is the only thriving democracy in the Middle East where someone like her, a woman, a lesbian, a political agitator, would be protected. The people in whose name she purports to speak, however, would oppress, punish, and possibly put her to death for merely who she is. In light of this selective blindness, it can only be surmised that Butler is operating with a special kind of bias. To those who would distinguish between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, I retort, there is no difference. To be anti-Israel is to be anti-Jewish. Israel is the Jewish state. Of course, the other great irony here is that Butler herself is Jewish. Despite this fact, right, she seems to have little to no appreciation for her people's history and the kind of deep memory and moral responsibility that it entails. Instead, she opts to identify with neo-leftist academics whose zealous and sanctimonious policing of global injustices have cultivated this very special and disproportionate animosity towards Israel. Instead of allowing her persecuted status as a Jewish lesbian to inform a subtle, empathic interpretation, she preemptively apologizes for her academic success and social acceptance by self-effacingly criticizing her own people, which is a classic and all too common unconscious self-hatred that we've seen many times before with Marx and Arendt and Chomsky. But I'll let you read the rest on your own. Of course, Penn State refused to add my addendum. I just wanted them to slip it in the middle of the night into the library, where this thesis, no one's ever going to read this anyway. Symbolic, but no, absolutely not. And they met me with some very kind of, durable institutional inflexibility. So I decided to disseminate it myself. I sent it to as many people as I could. I emailed it. I posted it on Facebook. I started circulating it around the internet. And lo and behold, I am starting to hear from people. I'm getting a response. My hero, Phyllis Chesler, who wrote a very important book about 13 years ago, decides that I emailed it to her just to thank her for the inspiration. She writes an article in the Israel National News. And the articles are getting comments. They're getting comments. Joshua Levitt, Mr. Levitt, who's here, thank you so much for coming, writes a brilliant piece in the Allgemeiner. And I always, is it Allgemeiner or Allgemeiner? Allgemeiner. Really capturing the arc of this whole story. And I thank him greatly. I get a congratulatory email from none other than Alan Dershowitz. Who knew? I get a phone interview from a Tel Aviv radio station. I am on a blog in Australia. A poet from Nigeria writes me. It is really quite amazing, right? And this could not have happened a generation ago, or even, 10 years ago. And we start a Facebook group, and we call it RDS. And we have 75 members right now, and it's growing. And finally, Mr. Charles Asher Small somehow finds my phone number and calls me. And this is the greatest honor. This is it. This is like the top you can get, right, in this field. And he invites me to collaborate with him. And apparently, I did, as he says, I touched a nerve. It's funny, I should have done this earlier. It's been brewing for so long. God, I waited too long. But never, it's better late than never. Interesting, the timing, because right around that time, Butler was supposed to give a talk about Kafka at the Jewish Museum. The Jewish Museum invited her. But this time, it didn't work. The pressure was very strong. I'm wondering if it was the timing, but it did happen within a matter of weeks that the curatorship at the Jewish Museum, who run in the same circles as the academics that I spoke about, invited her. But from all the pressure, she decided to bow out, or maybe she was asked to bow out at the last minute. Mr. Levitt wrote another great article, which was then picked up by Haaretz, I believe, which is Israel's greatest, most important newspaper. And suddenly I'm in Haaretz. Who knew? Shortly thereafter, Butler issues a joint statement with Rashid Khalidi, who was a very prominent Palestinian academic, complaining. I'm sorry? And a good friend of Obama, thank you. Complaining that they're being censored. Oh my goodness. And she's really getting a taste of the medicine. The most amazing thing happens when, out of the blue, lo and behold, Judith Butler, none other than the Judith Butler, emails me, right? And some people really, again, consider this woman to be God, not to exaggerate. And granted, she is one of the great living American philosophers. And she's emailing me. Who am I? She's emailing me. And this is what she says. Dear Dahn Hiuni, I'm wondering whether you might be willing to meet for coffee or tea in NYC sometime in April. I would like a chance to have a conversation with you. I have the sense we might be able to understand each other in person, and I would welcome that chance. It's lovely. Judith Butler. I actually consulted with my new group, my RDS Facebook group, and let everybody kind of help me decide what to do about this email, because it was a critical juncture. And at the end, I decided not to meet her and not to reply. I felt like, and I'm a teacher, right? Dialogue, Socratic dialogue is my thing. I felt like I had heard enough of Judith Butler for the time being. And, maybe if I have a podium for 15 minutes, maybe it's time for her to hear from me. And so I think the greatest thing about this whole story is to never underestimate the power of one individual. I'm an immigrant from the Middle East. I'm like a little art professor. Who am I? But she decided that I was worthwhile, talking to. Maybe she wanted to neutralize me. Maybe she wanted to have an honest conversation. I'm not sure. I'm willing to have a conversation with her, but in public. I'm a little afraid of her. So I'm willing to do it if, Columbia or Berkeley or these other institutions that she's associated with invite me. I'm very happy that this is just the beginning. We are now under the auspices of ISGAP with the generous support of Charles. We're going to take this forward. We're going to keep going. We are announcing today that we are forming a group, and we, after much thought, have decided to call it Scholars for the Legitimate Defense of Israel. Scholars for the Legitimate Defense of Israel. SLDI. Is that right? I hope so. And this will be a group that provides a rigorous academic refuting of the BDS movement. And it's going to be intellectual and it's going to be academic. There will also be a subgroup that will address, on a personal level, the experiences of Jewish and Israeli professors in academia. We thought about calling it the trauma of expressing forbidden ideas, or simply Zionists Anonymous, ZA. This group will serve to, just like the feminists did in the 60s and 70s, to do some much-needed consciousness raising about, to speak, to give voice to these experiences that are very real and very painful. And I know some of you have had them. And I'm happy to say that eminent psychiatrist and Columbia professor, Larry Amsel, Larry, will be joining me to co-moderate this portion of the group, the more therapeutic aspect of it. And I am really looking forward to it. I'm thrilled. You know, it's funny, it's at a certain point in life you have to realize maybe your calling was not exactly what you thought it was, you know. But here it is, and I welcome it, and so thank you. Thank you very much.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive on DVD with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.